My name is Edward Thornfield, heir to Magnolia Grove, the grand house with white columns and a graveyard of secrets beneath its floors. I write by a shaking candle in the Ohio dark. My hands still smell like smoke. My ears still hold the screams. I was the white brother who chose the chain over the whip, the 112 over the 1. And on a black October night in 1859, I lit the match that ended my family's name. I remember it simply. Torches rising like red flowers, rifles taken from locked rooms, the hush before a storm, when even the frogs go quiet. I remember Moses, 8 years old, clutching his mother's dress. I remember old Tom's eyes, wet steel, steady, when he gripped my shoulder and said, "If you step forward now, there is no road back." I stepped. The house groaned as if it knew its sins. The cotton fields glittered with dew and gunpowder. William, my brother, staggered from his table, wine on his lips, cruelty in his smile, until the door burst and the people he broke walked in standing tall. Fire took the curtains first, the portraits next, then the lies. Before we begin, if you believe buried history must be told, subscribe now and comment your state below so I know where you're watching from. Stories like this were meant to be silenced. We will not let them. I chose conscience over blood. I chose them over him. If freedom demands a price in fire and sorrow, would you pay it? I was born in 1835 in the heart of Mississippi, on land so rich with cotton that men called it white gold. Magnolia Grove spread over 5,000 acres, with fields that seemed endless to my child's eyes. But even as a boy, I knew that this empire rested on broken backs. My family owned more than 300 enslaved men, women, and children. I was supposed to inherit them all. Yet from the very beginning, my life was not like my brother's. William was 8 years older, tall, sharp-eyed, chosen by father to carry the Thornfield name forward. Every whip crack he heard was a lesson. Every ledger he read was practice for the empire. He was raised to command, I was not. When I was 4, my mother, Elizabeth, died of yellow fever. Father buried himself in work and left me to wander. And so the ones who raised me were not Thornfields of blood, but Thornfields of chain. Sarah, the cook, tucked me into bed when fever struck. Old Tom, the groom, taught me to fish in the muddy creek, his hands rough but steady as oak. I played tag with children whose names would later appear in sale records. To me, they were simply my friends. William laughed at me for it. A master cannot be a playmate, he said, repeating father's lessons. But I could not unsee what I saw. The welts on backs, the fear in eyes, the silence when overseers walked by. Father noticed too. Let him, he told William once. When he grows, he'll learn his place. Then his softness will make him a better overseer. But he was wrong. Each kindness I received from enslaved, hands planted something deep inside me. The day I first understood the difference between William and me was the day a boy no older than 7 spilled water in the dining room. William demanded the whip. I begged him to stop. Father silenced me with a look. The boy was whipped until his voice broke. I cried harder than he did. That night, Sarah whispered as she dabbed my tears with her apron. Don't forget this feeling, Edward. A man's heart is his true inheritance, not land. William inherited father's steel. I inherited my mother's heart. That difference would set us on a road where only one of us would walk away. Every night I lay in my bed in the great house. I listened to the distant songs from the slave quarters. Songs carried in low voices, words I could not always understand, but feelings I could. Grief, hope, rage. I fell asleep to those songs, not the lullabies of my own family. Magnolia Grove raised 2 sons. One learned to master through fear. The other learned to live through love. We were brothers by blood, but enemies by destiny. And even as a child, I felt it. One day, this place would burn. 35 Mississippi. 1 house, 2 brothers, one raised to rule, one raised to betray. Would you have trusted the songs of the enslaved? Or the silence of your own kin? I was 12 the first time I understood that silence could be as deadly as the whip. The overseer dragged Mary, a young woman barely older than my brother, into the yard. Her crime? Teaching her daughter letters traced in the dirt. For that, William ordered 50 lashes. Father would have given a warning. But William wanted blood. I stood there frozen, watching the crowd gather, men with chains on their wrists, women clutching children, eyes lowered to the ground because to look up meant more punishment. The sound of leather striking flesh carved something into me that never healed. Mary's scream cut through the evening air like a torn hymn. Her daughter wailed for her, begging, "Mama, please." I stepped forward without thinking. "William, stop." My voice cracked, but it carried. My brother turned to me, whip in his hand, face flushed with fury. "This is not your concern," he said. "These are my slaves, and I'll deal with them as I see fit." "They are people," I shouted back, surprising even myself. "Not beasts, not property." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Every slave in that yard heard me. Every overseer heard me. And William heard me most of all. That night, when the yard was empty, I snuck to the quarters. Sarah pressed cloth soaked in vinegar to Mary's torn back. The girl who caused it all, 10 years old, eyes wide, looked at me with a mix of wonder and suspicion. "Why did you help us?" she whispered. "You're white. You're his brother. You're supposed to be like him." Her question burned in me. Why did I? Because I could not stand by. Because when I looked at Sarah, Old Tom, Rachel, Moses, I did not see property. I saw family. My real family. That was the night I chose where my loyalty lay. William, of course, saw it as weakness. At dinner, he leaned across the table and hissed, "You shame our name. You think they'll thank you? They'll cut your throat the first chance they get." But when I returned to the quarters, Old Tom clapped his weathered hand on my shoulder and said, "Boy, you got your mama's heart. Hold on to it, because in this world it's the only weapon stronger than the whip." From then on, I began to drift further from William's world. I no longer looked at ledgers. I lingered in the kitchens, the stables, the fields. I listened to the whispers when overseers weren't near. Whispers of running, whispers of fighting, whispers of freedom. I was a Thornfield by blood, but the songs in the night, their songs, were the ones that guided me. Every lash I witnessed was another seed. Every cry for mercy another spark. Sparks that would one day light Magnolia Grove like a funeral pyre. 850 Mississippi. One lash, one shout, one spark of rebellion. If you had stood in that yard, would you have stayed silent? Or spoken against your own blood? By the time I was 15, the slave quarters were more of a home to me than the big house with its polished floors and heavy portraits. At night, when Father thought I slept, I slipped from my room and crossed the dirt paths to the cabins. Smoke curled from their chimneys and the air smelled of cornmeal, wood smoke, and something warmer. Belonging. Inside, voices hummed in low tones, words braided into song. They sang of rivers, of freedom, of God's promise beyond the horizon. I didn't always understand the words, but I understood the ache. It was in those cabins that I first heard whispers not meant for white ears. Plans of running north. Stories of a conductor who could lead them to freedom through forests and swamps. Dreams exchanged like contraband in the dark. At first, they fell silent when I entered. But Sarah would nod, and Old Tom would grunt, and slowly the voices rose again. They trusted me half, enough to let me sit by the fire, but never enough to share everything. One night, Tom pulled me outside. His face was lit by the dying coals. "You're different from your brother," he said, voice low. "But you're still a Thornfield. If you carry our whispers back to William, it will mean death for us all." I swore on my mother's grave that I would never betray them. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then maybe the Lord put you here for a reason." Father was slipping by then. His heart was weak, his cough deep. William was already taking more control of the plantation, and his cruelty was sharpening like a blade. I saw the overseers harden under his gaze, the punishments harsher, the fear heavier. Once I found Moses, the boy who had spilled water years ago, hiding by the creek, shoulders trembling. William had threatened to sell him away from his mother. I sat with him until the sobs quieted, promising him he would not be taken. I wasn't sure how I could keep that promise, but in that moment I meant it. The enslaved saw it too. They began to call me young Master Edward, with a tone different from the one they used for William. There was no fear in it, only a strange kind of hope. Hope that I carried like a secret flame inside me. But hope is dangerous. It spreads faster than fire, and William noticed. He watched me at meals, his eyes narrowing. He whispered to Father that I was soft, too close to the slaves. Father dismissed it. "He'll grow," he said. He'll learn. But William's gaze told me the truth. He would never let me forget my softness. He would make it my downfall. That night, as the songs drifted through the dark and I lay awake listening, I knew something was coming. Something bigger than whispers, bigger than me. The quarters were teaching me a truth I could not unlearn. Freedom does not come by waiting. It comes by daring, 1850s Mississippi. One cabin, one promise, one whisper of freedom. If you had heard their whispers, would you have kept their secret? Or carried it back to the master? Father died in the fields, under the burning Mississippi sun, his heart seizing mid-step. He fell among the cotton rows that had fattened his purse and broken 1,000 backs. By evening, William was master of Magnolia Grove. The change was swift, like a storm cloud swallowing the sky. Where Father had been stern but predictable, William was cruel for sport. He cut food rations, extended work hours, and brought in a new overseer named Morrison, a man with dead eyes and a whip he treated like a second tongue. Fear settled over Magnolia Grove like damp fog. I was 19, but I felt the weight of chains even without wearing them. Each day I watched William grow drunk on power. He laughed when men collapsed from heat. He sneered when mothers begged to keep their children. He sold 3 families. Within his first month, tearing them apart like cattle at auction. One evening, he stood before the assembled slaves, his boots shining, his voice sharp. "My father was too lenient," he declared. "Softness breeds disobedience. From this day forward, you will learn proper discipline." That night, he proved his words. Rachel's boy Moses, barely 8, spilled water at supper. For that, William threatened to sell him to New Orleans, where sugar fields swallowed children whole. Rachel fell to her knees, clutching his boots, begging. William shoved her aside like dirt. I still see her face. I still hear her scream. It was then I felt it, something breaking inside me. The boy I had promised to protect, the boy who once cried by the creek, was now marked for death in a land far away. I confronted William, my voice shaking with rage. "He's a child," I shouted. "Your cruelty has no end." His smile was thin as a blade. "They are mine, Edward. I can sell them, beat them, kill them, and no law will touch me. That is what it means to be master." That night, I tended Rachel as she wept until she could weep no more. Moses clung to me, whispering, "Please don't let him take me." I promised again. This time I swore with more than words. From then on, I was not just an onlooker. I was a shield. I patched wounds, hid stolen scraps of food, whispered courage into ears bent low with despair. The enslaved began to look at me differently, not just as the softer brother, but as someone who might do more than weep. William noticed, and he hated me for it. At supper, he leaned close, his voice a venomous whisper. "This plantation isn't big enough for both of us. Sooner or later, Edward, one of us will have to go." I said nothing. But inside, the answer was already burning. It would not be me. 854 Mississippi. One death, one heir, one reign of cruelty begun. If your own brother turned cruelty into law, would you bow your head or bare your teeth? It was spring of 1856 when William tried to break the man who had raised me. Old Tom was 68 then, his back bent from years of tending horses, his beard gone white. He was more father to me than the man who'd sired me, more steady than any preacher. His crime, helping a field worker who had collapsed from sunstroke, William saw compassion as rebellion. "He's grown too bold," my brother muttered, standing in the yard as Tom was dragged forward. "The old man thinks he's more than property. Today he will learn his place." The whip post stood like a gallows in the center of Magnolia Grove. I'd seen too many tied to it. That day I could not watch another. The overseer raised the whip. I stepped forward. "Stop," my voice carried across the yard. Every face turned toward me. Every breath seemed to hang in the air. William sneered. "Get out of the way, Edward. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me more than you know," I said, my hand tightening on the pistol at my belt. "Tom is under my protection now." The overseer froze. William's eyes narrowed. For a long, terrible moment, it was just the two of us. Two brothers, heirs of the same name, staring across a gulf wider than blood. "You would draw a weapon on me?" William's voice was low, dangerous. On your own kin? Over a slave? Over a man, I said, steady now. A man with more honor in his little finger than you will ever hold. My pistol cleared its holster, barrel leveled at his chest. William's hand twitched toward his own weapon, but I was faster. Around us, the yard fell silent. Slaves, overseers, children, every eye locked on the sight of two Thornfield brothers at war. For a heartbeat, I thought one of us would die right there. Then William stepped back, his lips curling into something between a smile and a snarl. This plantation isn't big enough for both of us, he said coldly. One of us is going to leave. You're right, I told him. But it won't be me. That night, Sarah and Tom came to my room, their faces carved with worry. You've crossed a line, Sarah whispered. William will not forgive this. I don't care, I told her. But Tom's voice was quieter, heavier. You should. A man who will torture his slaves won't hesitate to kill his own brother. I lay awake until dawn, the pistol on my chest, the weight of my choice pressing down like stone. There was no turning back now. My blood had drawn its line. That was the night Magnolia Grove split in two, William's rule of fear and my quiet rebellion of conscience. The war between us had begun, 56 Mississippi. One whip, one pistol, one brother against another. If it were your kin standing at that post, would you fire to save a life, or lower your eyes and walk away? After that day, Magnolia Grove was no longer just a plantation. It was a battlefield waiting for the first shot. William knew it. I knew it. And so did the people in the quarters. Every time the whip cracked, every time a family was torn apart, I saw their eyes flick to me, asking without words, when? I had never thought of myself as a leader. I was no soldier, no general, but cruelty makes generals out of men who cannot stay silent. It began with whispers in the woods. I met Sarah, old Tom, Samuel, Rachel, and a handful of others by the creek where Tom once taught me to fish. We spoke in low voices, every rustle of leaves making us pause. If we strike, Samuel said, his arms crossed tight, scars running across his chest. We'll all hang for it. Men, women, children. There's no mercy for rebellion. They're dying anyway, I said, slowly by the lash, by the auction block. At least this way they'll die fighting for something. The faces around me were shadows in the moonlight, some lit with hope, others dark with fear. Sarah spoke next. And what of the children, the old? What happens to them when guns answer back? Freedom bought in blood is still blood. Her words cut me deep. She was right. Any rebellion would cost lives. Innocence would suffer. I carried that weight even as I argued. What is the cost of doing nothing? More whips, more sails, more graves dug behind the cabins. Old Tom placed his hand on mine. If we move careful, quiet. We choose the time, the place. And we don't fight for revenge. We fight for freedom. That night, a seed became a plan. I began to steal what I could. Rifles from the locked gunroom. Knives from the kitchens. Axes from the stables. We hid them beneath floorboards in hollowed logs, anywhere eyes would not look. I studied the plantation like a soldier studies a map. The armory, the overseer quarters, the stables, the big house. I memorized where the guards walked, when they drank, when their eyes grew heavy. We practiced in secret. Young men swung axes into trees, imagining overseers' skulls. Women sharpened knives meant for cooking but destined for throats. Children were trained to carry messages, their small steps too light to draw suspicion. Not everyone was ready. Aunt Celia, older than any of us, shook her head when I told her. I remember Nat Turner, she said. I remember the fires, the hangings. You think the South will spare us if we fail? They'll make examples of us all. Her words haunted me. But then I thought of Moses, trembling as William spoke of selling him south. I thought of Rachel begging, her hands pressed to the dirt. I thought of Mary's back, split open for daring to teach her child. And I knew there was no life in silence we would strike, not for vengeance, for freedom, for a chance at tomorrow, 1857 Mississippi. One creek, one whisper, one plan for fire and freedom. If freedom was before you, but it meant risking every soul you loved, would you dare to plan it? The summer of 1858 was thick with heat and fear. William's cruelty grew daily. He drank harder, gambled more, punished faster. The overseers followed his lead, turning Magnolia Grove into a field of quiet terror. But in that fear, our fire spread. Night after night, I gathered them, first 10, then 30, then 50. We met in the woods, in barns, by riversides where frogs sang louder than human voices. Each time I spoke the same words, "We have waited long enough. Freedom will not come from heaven. We must take it with our hands." Some looked at me with doubt, others with burning eyes, but slowly they began to nod. By October, we had 112 men and women, field hands with backs striped like bark, mothers who had lost children to the auction block, sons who had never tasted a day without hunger. They all stood before me ready. It did not feel like leading. It felt like standing in the center of a storm and holding the lightning in my bare hands. We made our pact one night by the creek. The moon was high, the air heavy with silence. Sarah stepped forward first, her hands trembling. "For my children," she said. "For the ones he sold and the ones he threatens now, I pledge." Samuel followed. "For every scar." Rachel, clutching Moses, whispered through her tears, "For him." One by one they spoke. Each word was a stone laid on the path we could no longer turn from. When the last voice fell silent, old Tom turned to me. "And you, Edward? What do you pledge?" I looked at the faces around me. Faces that had raised me, fed me, carried me when I was small. Faces beaten and broken but not destroyed. "I pledge everything," I said. "My blood, my name, my life." I was born heir to Magnolia Grove. Tonight I burn that inheritance. From this moment I am not your master. I am your brother. A hush fell over them. Then a low murmur rose, swelling into something that was not quite song, not quite prayer. It was the sound of chains cracking in the imagination before they broke in reality. To seal it, I knelt by the fire and smeared soot across my face. My white skin vanished under black ash. Tonight, I told them, we are one. No master, no slave. Only a people fighting for freedom. Tom's old voice carried the final words. So be it. From this night we walked together, to fight, to flee, to die if need be, but never again to bow. It was done, we were 112, and we were bound by a pact stronger than fear. 58 Mississippi. One fire, one oath, 112 souls bound to revolt. If you stood in that circle, would you swear the same oath, knowing it might cost your life? October 31st, 1859. Magnolia Grove had always held its harvest celebration on that night. Lanterns glowed in the big house. Wine flowed, and overseers stuffed themselves with roast while laughter echoed across the fields. That night, William drank until his cheeks burned crimson. He had no idea the celebration was his funeral. We were waiting in the shadows. I remember the silence before it began. Dozens of hearts pounding like war drums, the air heavy with sweat and fear. Samuel's call, an owl's cry, cut through the night. That was the signal. In an instant, the world turned. Torches blazed, smoke rose, and the doors of the big house burst inward. We poured in like a flood. I was at the front, pistol drawn, soot smeared across my face. William staggered up from his chair, confusion on his wine-wet lips. "Edward?" He gasped, his eyes darting to the men and women behind me. Slaves armed with axes, knives, rifles. His voice cracked. "What? What is this?" "This," I said, steady as fire ate the curtains, "is the end of your reign." The room erupted. Morrison, the overseer, reached for his whip, but Samuel's blade found his chest first. Others fell just as quickly, their cruelty repaid in screams. I remember Rachel's cry as she held Moses back from the blood, shielding his eyes. I remember Sarah, her hands steady as she carried a torch through the parlor, setting portraits aflame. The faces of our ancestors, the Thornfield legacy, melted in fire. William drew his pistol, his hand shaking. Before he could fire, old Tom struck him across the skull with his heavy cane. My brother dropped to the floor, blood pouring through his hair. Tom's voice shook, but his words did not. "That is for every lash, every grave, every child you sold." For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then Rachel screamed, and the fire roared higher, and the spell broke. Justice was no longer whispered. It was screamed. Across the plantation, the same storm swept through. Overseer cabins burned. The armory was raided. Rifles passed from hand to trembling hand. Torches lit the night sky until it looked like dawn. The enslaved who had not joined us ran. Clutching children, pulled into the safety of the woods. Others stayed, swinging hoes like swords, turning years of labor into weapons. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt only weight. Every scream was heavy. Every strike of blade or whip a chain snapping but leaving blood in its place. William stirred at my feet, moaning. I could have let him burn there. I almost did, but I couldn't. He was my brother, even if cruelty had devoured him. Drag him out, I ordered, my voice hollow. Leave him for the law. Some spat at me for it. Others nodded. But mercy was the one thing I could still hold. When the big house collapsed in flames, its columns falling like broken teeth, I stood with Sarah and Tom and Samuel, watching the fire consume my birthright. The Thornfield name ended in crackling timber and black smoke. Magnolia Grove, once a monument to wealth and power, was now a torch in the night sky, a beacon to the south that the enslaved had risen. We were no longer 112 slaves. We were 112 rebels, and there was no turning back. 859 Mississippi. One night, one fire, one dynasty reduced to ash. Would you have struck the match, or watched the house burn from the shadows? We left Magnolia Grove under a sky thick with smoke. Behind us, the house collapsed into itself, flames chewing timber and memory alike. Ahead of us stretched the wilderness, swamps, rivers, forests where the moon lit only enough to remind us how far we had to go. We were 112 when we began. Men, women, children, elders. Some carried rifles stolen from the armory. Others carried nothing but hope. The youngest were hoisted on backs. The oldest leaned on sticks, too stubborn to be left behind. Every mile was stolen. Every step could have been our last. By dawn, the first posters were already being printed. Edward Thornfield, traitor, $5,000 reward. My own face stared back from every tree and tavern wall. The South could not abide what I had done. A white heir leading slaves into revolt. It tore at the very myth of their world. William survived, battered but breathing. That alone fueled their rage. They swore vengeance, not just on me, but on everyone who had dared follow. Slave catchers came fast. Bloodhounds howled through the night, their teeth trained for flesh. We heard their cries in the distance, closer each time. We learned to walk in rivers, masking our scent, our feet raw and bleeding. On the fourth day, 8 of our number were caught while foraging. Gunfire cracked like breaking bones. We froze in the trees, listening to their screams. Samuel reached for his rifle, eyes wild. "We have to go back." "No," I said, gripping his arm. My throat burned as I forced the words. "If we go back, we all die. Their sacrifice keeps us alive. We keep moving." The next morning, we heard what happened. The 8 were hanged in the town square, their bodies left swinging as warning. The crows got to them before the priests. I could not save them. Their faces followed me in every dream. But even as the South hunted us, word spread. Whispers traveled faster than hounds. The Thornfield slaves rose up. They burned the house. A white brother led them north. In slave quarters across Mississippi, voices trembled with a new kind of hope. "They did it," I overheard one whisper from a field hand we passed in secret. "They killed the master. They're running free." Another voice answered, "It's just stories." But even stories carry fire, and fire spreads. The South feared us more than they hated us. A slave rebellion was terrifying enough, but a white heir, one of their own, betraying his blood to fight for the enslaved, that cracked their world at its spine. They sent riders from 3 states, bounty hunters with iron chains, armed patrols with rifles. They wanted us alive if possible, but dead would do just as well. We moved only at night, hiding in caves, barns, thickets so deep we could hardly breathe. Hunger gnawed at us. Children cried into their mothers' shoulders, muffled so the sound would not carry. Still, we pressed on. Every dawn I asked myself the same question. Had I doomed them by leading? But then Moses, small hand clutching mine, whispered, "You promised, Master Edward. You promised we'd be free." And I knew there was no turning back. 59 Mississippi. One road, one hunted band. One promise heavier than chains. If freedom meant being hunted like an animal, would you keep walking or surrender to the chains? We reached the Ohio River on a cold November morning. The air stung with frost, and mist rose from the water like breath from a giant's mouth. Freedom was just across that current. 1 mile of river stood between bondage and life, but death was waiting on our side of the shore. A dozen men, armed to the teeth, slave catchers from the deep south, professionals with rifles, dogs straining at their leashes. At their center stood Morrison, the overseer who had escaped the burning of Magnolia Grove. His face twisted into something less than human when he saw me. "Edward Thornfield," he shouted. "Surrender yourself, and I'll spare the rest. One white traitor's worth more than 100 slaves." His words rang out over the river. Children clutched their mothers. Samuel spat in the dirt. I raised my rifle, hand steady, though my heart thundered. "No deal, Morrison. We all cross together or none cross at all." The dogs lunged. The rifles fired, and the banks of the Ohio became a battlefield. The crack of gunfire echoed through the trees. Screams tore the morning air. I saw Rachel fall to her knees, shielding Moses with her body. Samuel charged with a blade, his roar louder than the hounds. Old Tom, my second father, stood tall despite his years, firing until the last bullet was gone. A ball struck his chest. He staggered, blood staining his shirt. He gripped my arm as he fell, his voice a whisper even as life left him. "Get them across. That's all that matters." I wanted to stay with him, to hold him as he slipped away. But there was no time. His sacrifice demanded action, not grief. The fight was chaos. Dogs lunged and were cut down by knives. Men fell screaming into the mud. Morrison fired at me, the ball grazing my shoulder. But before he could shoot again, Samuel's rifle put him in the dirt. When the smoke cleared, the bank was littered with bodies, half theirs, half ours. We had started the night 87 strong. By the time we pulled the last boat into the water, we were 56. I carried Moses in my arms as we pushed from the shore. His small fingers clutched my shirt, his eyes wide with terror and wonder as the river carried us forward. Behind us, the south raged. Before us, the north waited. When my boots touched Ohio soil, I fell to my knees, Moses still in my arms. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of chains lift. Not just from me, but from all of us who survived. But freedom was no triumph. It was a graveyard. I saw Tom's empty place, Rachel's absence, the faces of 31 who would never see the far shore. I had promised freedom, but freedom had demanded blood, and the river carried their names forever. 59 Ohio River, 1 mile of water. One last battle. 56 souls stepped free, paid for by the dead. If freedom cost the lives of half your family, would you still cross that river? We crossed into Ohio not as slaves, not as masters, but as survivors. 56 out of the 112 who had begun the journey. The rest lay behind us, buried in forests, left hanging on trees, or swallowed by the Ohio's cold current. Freedom tasted like ash. At first, the free soil felt unreal. The trees looked the same. The sky stretched just as wide, and yet for the first time no patrols rode to claim us. No whip cracked in the distance. The air was heavy with silence, not chains. Quakers took us in. Farmers risked their lives to hide us in barns, cellars, and attics. Children who had once hidden from hounds now laughed in fields. Mothers held their sons without fear of the auction block. Some of the young men joined Union militias when the war came, eager to keep striking blows at the South. But peace was not mine. For me, there were wanted posters still nailed to every tree south of the line. Edward Thornfield, race traitor, murderer, fugitive. The bounty never shrank. 5,000 for my head, dead or alive. Even in Ohio, hunters came sniffing, so I kept to the shadows. A cabin deep in the woods became my shelter. I wrote by candlelight, trying to pin the screams of Magnolia Grove to paper, as if words could cage ghosts. But the ghosts came anyway. Tom's weathered face as he died in my arms. Rachel's empty bed, her boy Moses curled in Sarah's lap. The 8 who swung from Mississippi trees, the 31 who bled out by the Ohio. Every night I asked myself, was it worth it? Sometimes the answer came when I saw Moses, older now, running through the grass with no chains on his ankles. Sometimes it came in letters from Samuel, fighting with the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, his words blazing. Every Confederate I strike for Tom, but sometimes the answer never came. I knew this much: William never rose again. He lived but broken, drunk, half-mad, muttering about betrayal and ghosts. Magnolia Grove was ashes, its land sold in pieces. The Thornfield dynasty was dead, and yet I had not escaped it. Blood is not erased by fire. My brother's voice still echoed in my dreams, sneering. You betrayed your own race. Perhaps I had. Or perhaps I had finally claimed the only race that mattered. The human one. The others built lives. Sarah remarried in Cincinnati, running a boarding house where every guest found warmth. Samuel became a leader among freedmen, building schools for those who had once been forbidden to read. Moses grew into a preacher. His small voice turned into thunder. Me, I remained a fugitive, haunted and hollow. Freedom had saved them, but it left me wandering. Still, I would choose it again, because better scars in freedom than silence in chains. In 60 Ohio, one cabin, one broken Heir, 56 free souls and ghosts that never sleep. If you carried freedom in one hand and ghosts in the other, would you call it victory or curse? It has been years since that night of fire, yet I still write by candlelight, the shadows on these cabin walls longer than memory. The war has come and gone. The Union tore the South apart, and slavery was buried under its own weight of blood. Lincoln signed the proclamation, and armies of blue marched where Magnolia Grove once stood. And still, people whisper of us. They whisper of the Thornfield Rebellion, the white heir who chose chains over comfort, who betrayed his brother to lead 112 enslaved toward freedom. In taverns it is told like a ghost story. In cabins it is told like a prayer. In the halls of planters, it is told like a curse. Some historians argue it meant little, a ripple before the storm of war. Others claim it was a spark, proof that conscience could pierce even the armor of privilege. I do not know which is true. I only know the cost. Of the 112, 56 crossed that river. Half gone, their faces still walk with me. Old Tom, who died so Moses might live. Rachel, who fell before she could taste free soil. The 8 who swung, their bodies left for crows. Do I regret it? Some nights I do. Some nights I wake to the sound of whips in my dreams and wonder if I led them to graves instead of freedom. But then I remember Sarah's words when she visited me last spring. Moses at her side, grown tall, a preacher with fire in his voice. She looked at me with eyes steady as ever and said, "Whatever else happened, Edward, you gave us a chance to breathe as free people. That's worth any price." Maybe she is right. Maybe the price was worth it. William did not live to see the war's end. They tell me he died alone in Natchez, drunk, raving, a shadow of the brother I once knew. Magnolia Grove remains a ruin. Its land turned wild. Some say the place is haunted. That screams echo through the fields on October nights. Perhaps they are right. I do not fear ghosts. I carry them already. When I die, I hope no monument is built. Let the soil cover me as it has covered so many. Let the story belong not to me, but to the 56 who walked free, and to the countless others who still dreamt of it in chains. Because this was never about one white man's choice. It was about a people who refused to bow. And if history remembers me at all, let it not be as traitor or hero, but as a man who finally chose the family that had chosen him all along. Would I do it again? Yes, even knowing the graves it filled, even knowing the ghosts it gave me. Because freedom was worth it. Mississippi to Ohio, one heir, one oath, one rebellion turned to legend. And now I ask you, when history demands a price, when blood and conscience stand at war, what choice would you make?